I would now like to go ahead and introduce the featured speakers. Dr. Atul Goyal has served as a senior director at companies such as Hewlett-Packard and Agilent in areas of R&D, marketing, sales, and manufacturing. He was also the founder and president of Colorado Superconductor, Inc. Dr. Goyal holds degrees from the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, and Yale University, and currently serves on Yale's AYA Board of Governors. Over the last 25 years, Atul Goyal has received over 20 patents in the United States and abroad. Gunjan Bagla is the managing director of Amritt and has over 25 years of industry experience in marketing and sourcing. A mechanical engineering graduate of the Indian Institute of Technology, IIT Kanpur in India, he also holds an MBA with honors from Southern Illinois University. Gunjan travels extensively to India and China. He is based in California and author of the book, Business in 21st Century India, How to Profit Today from Tomorrow's Most Exciting Market, published in July 2008 by Warner Hachette Books. He has also appeared in the New York Times, BBC Television, and Bloomberg TV. So without further ado, here is Dr. Atul Goyal to kick off the presentation.
Good morning. I'm going to use our time today to take us through the experiences that Amritt has had in helping its clients set up captive R&D centers in India. So I'll start off by asking, why would one want to set up an offshore R&D center for such a critical function, such as R&D? You may simply wish to do that because you want to reduce the cost of R&D, or you may want to staff an R&D or related activity with resources that are harder to get in your home country. There may be a skill set that you need to develop products for a geography that you do not currently address, or you do so in a way that you need to improve. Or you may want to establish a prestigious presence in an important emerging market, in this case, India. Many companies have set up captive R&D operations in India. By captive, I mean a center owned by the company. While your particular need is unique, there is much that can be learned from what we at Amritt have learned in turn over the last decade, helping companies and individuals who have managed setting up such an operation. In this webinar, we discuss a structured approach to confirming the need to establish an offshore operation, compiling the requirements, investigating the landscape, and establishing an R&D operation in India. Today, we will briefly discuss from our fund of experience, when does it make sense to set up a captive R&D center in India? What are the alternatives for effectively staffing and scaling such a center? What criteria should one use to choose the best location for your operation? And how do you avoid pitfalls and surprises as you navigate in India? So the first question that you would want to ask is, why set up an operation in India? Over the last 2 decades, a combination of economic reforms and also the sourcing of engineering services from India by Western firms has transformed India and made it into a locus of organized, high quality, and relatively inexpensive R&D resources. Some foreign companies choose to source R&D support services or portions of their product development lifecycle from third-party suppliers. Over the last decade, many firms have followed up by establishing a permanent, owned R&D operation in India. By one count, there were nearly 600 foreign-owned R&D centers operating in India of various sizes. We've found that having an R&D center in a country that has a large and rapidly growing market enables better access to those markets, both through the brand visibility you get by setting up an R&D center and also through the improved understanding of the local markets and the requirements that you get. Actually, I realize we moved on to the next slide already. So let me talk a little bit about the alternatives and why it makes sense. Establishing a new and captive R&D operation in a new geography is really a major undertaking that needs to be done with due consideration of the alternatives. You shouldn't just plunge in saying that this is what you want to do until you have explored your particular situation and what alternatives are being offered to you. The particulars of the planned operation, like size, staffing plans, the long-term intentions, etc., are important inputs both into the process of selecting the approach, to establishing it, and to structuring that operation. While outsourcing is relatively easier to do and it's more flexible in its operation than a captive approach, the captive approach confers many significant advantages, provided that the drivers for doing it are appropriate. So let's go ahead and compare the differences between a captive and an outsource. It's a very important question that you should address to your satisfaction before proceeding in either direction. The answer is really which one should you, the answer to the question of which one you should do really depends upon how big the activity is that you ultimately wish to outsource. The skills that you need, are they very specialized? Is the work core to your product line? And then what is the time frame in which you need to get the first results? Another question that is asked is, what about the costs? Is it cheaper to outsource or to resource a captive operation? Again, it depends. A captive can enable a less expensive resource base if it's large enough. The exact difference varies a great deal. Also, the initial startup costs are higher for the captive operation. We'll talk about some of these costs for an offshore operation a little later in this presentation. Let us look more closely at the alternative models for establishing a permanent R&D operation in India in the next slide. In this particular chart, you see all of the different alternatives, at least the major alternatives that you have for sourcing R&D resources from India. One way to evaluate them is to arrange these in this model where the effort, the relative effort you need to establish it is measured against the return that you get for that effort. So on the bottom axis, it's the amount of effort you need to put in, and on the vertical axis, the return you can potentially accrue if you do it right. So as you move from left to right, the degree of ownership increases in the activity, as does the effort for doing it. Generally, the potential return increases with the amount of effort you put in. I guess nothing ventured, nothing gained. Furthermore, it's possible actually to combine these models. So you don't have to do one or the other. You could do a hybrid that could fine-tune the attributes to your particular needs. In addition to the model that you feel is best suited to your needs, and that to support your timelines and the corporate stance on risk, you need to also decide where you want to evolve it to. For instance, you can go from an offshore model to one that is increasingly more captive. Many of our clients have started by entering India to do R&D using a model on the left side of the chart, some kind of collaboration or an outsource, and then over time, they've moved to the right. And as their perception of reduced investment risk develops, they'll go from a more outsource operation to a captive operation. Let's pause for a minute and see if anyone has any questions.
Yes, Atul, we have one question. Okay. And I would also like to encourage everyone to, at this time, go ahead and send us any questions as you have them, and then we will answer them throughout the session, if possible. So the question that somebody has asked is, how difficult is it to change a model after one has started working, in a particular approach, I guess?
Okay. That's a really good question, because people feel that once they've done something, they're absolutely committed to it, they've invested in it, and changing it is both very difficult, and it repudiates the fact that you made a push for a particular model. In reality, people evolve over time. Your needs evolve. Your confidence in the situation in India in terms of the quality of the resources, the quality of execution changes. So evolving from one model to another over time is actually a very common and natural thing to do. What helps is to really plan that you will need to change. If you're in a position through your planning, you can anticipate which direction you will need to go, as we've done with many of our clients, then that evolution becomes a part of the grand plan, a part of the sourcing roadmap.
Great, thanks. We can move on.
Okay. So let's talk about what one might want to do in such a center. And that's a very important question. Many companies first perform tasks in their offshore center that occur in the final phases of the product lifecycle process. So the lifecycle process goes from an investigation through concept, through design, on to developing the design, and then testing and verifying it. Many companies source their offshore and source their testing and verification first. It's a very definable task, a crisply executable task, and measurable one. So that's the thing that tends to go out at the first. And that's true whether people are doing an outsource or a captive activity. Many companies are uncomfortable assigning core early phase responsibilities to a new center. They just don't know how it's going to work out, whether they're going to be left holding the bag. However, we sometimes advise our clients to assign a less time-critical or renewal product to the center early in its life, something that's more holistic than just testing or verification. This can provide a learning opportunity to the center personnel. It's also a boost to recruitment and retention. So it's not necessarily a task that's right at the end of the product development lifecycle, but something that covers the entire product development lifecycle, but is not a mission-critical one. Now, as the confidence of the headquarters-based R&D management team, the home country R&D management team, grows in the capability and organizational talent of the R&D center, and that, of course, develops with a timely delivery of quality results, companies start doing more phases of the product developmental lifecycle at that center. This is really consistent with Amritt's PRNDL model of R&D resource engagement and utilization. I'm going to talk about this a little more in the next slide. So I'll touch upon this only briefly over here because this is quite an involved process core to our philosophy on how we guide our clients through accessing resources abroad. So what we do is we encourage our clients to start their R&D work in new captive centers at different stages of the development, depending upon their particular situation. If, however, the company has no other R&D experience, outsourced or otherwise, in that particular geography, we guide them to first assign tasks in stages 1 or 2 in the bottom left to that center, the bottom left in this particular chart. Now, over time, many of our clients will move the responsibilities of the R&D Center up and to the right on this chart. And along with that, accrue increasing benefits like efficient development of products tailored to that geography. So there's a lot of guidance involved in the bottom left, and then as you move up through the stages, that particular center can take on increasing amounts of responsibility. In extreme cases, at the top right, the center can even start defining requirements either for the home country markets or more often for those particular economic geographies in which that center is located, in this case, India. Let's take a short pause right now to conduct an online survey. Supriya, if you'll help me with that.
Yeah, Gunjan, sorry, Atul, we actually have a lot of ground to cover, so I think we should move on, and then if we have time towards the end, we will, do that.
All right, that sounds good. And I'll speed up a little bit. Hopefully we can enable that. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. This is the phased approach that we recommend that companies follow in establishing a captive center. The very important first critical step is to get executive and organizational sponsorship. One must get this buy-in. It's absolutely critical. It shouldn't be an activity that started as an investigation at a lower level without also simultaneously or even before that getting that buy-in, that sponsorship. We have actually often worked with our clients to help them gain that sponsorship if they don't have it by helping them present credible plans to their stakeholders. Many of our clients find that management chartered with the task of setting up the facility must be given significant latitude in the exact model and implementation path that they can follow. If they're too constrained, if they're over-constrained, it makes the task considerably more difficult. A broader and structured approach that addresses the needs of the whole business or even the whole company, enabling an implementation that gives much better delivery consistency, economies of scale, and a better achievement of the strategic product line and market goals of the corporation is possible. So instead of having a piecemeal approach where each business unit is going out after this captive center, looking across the whole company has its advantages. A center then can be large enough to get the real economies of scale. So the structured approach that we show over here, where you begin the investigation with the sponsorship, you look across your company or across a large business unit for alignment, can help you get that consolidation and get that single large entity established. So one of the most important things that you have to do is locate a center. You must do a very good job of your site selection. Again, we take our clients through a very structured approach in looking at these sites. The big names in India, in the Indian R&D landscape, is Bangalore. I think everybody has heard of Bangalore, and that seems to be where people first look and say, well, should we set up the center over there? There's actually quite a number of other very viable locales for your center. Furthermore, many cities, larger ones, have multiple locations. So there's not just one large location like a tax-free zone where you might want to establish, but multiple places that are very suitable for the company, and you have to look at your particular situation. Sometimes selection of the model for establishing an R&D operation will address the site issue quite straightforwardly. For example, if you're doing it in a kind of approach where you have a partner, a joint venture, then that joint venture might have that site already selected with pre-existing infrastructure. That makes it very easy. But if you're going to do it yourself, you should go through the structured approach. You should look at a multiplicity of cities, not just the big names. In fact, getting into some of the big famous cities now, is getting increasingly more expensive and difficult as they get congested. But even over there are locales that are suitable. So with this, I'd like to hand over to Gunjan and ask him to take us through a few case studies of clients we have helped with this task. Gunjan?
Wonderful. Thank you, Atul. And I think the case studies will also address the question that the caller brought up earlier by way of examples. The first case study that we are calling Company R is an entity that has about 350 people in their R&D organization. When they first came to us, they had some R&D work going on in China, and they had already made a decision to start looking very closely at outsourcing some of their activity towards India. Their focus at this time was primarily the lower functions within R&D, such as design verification and product testing. And we felt that that was an appropriate method for them to consider. But as we began analyzing their needs, we realized that even though the company was smaller than many others who have R&D centers in India, that their activity was focused enough that we could assemble a team in a specific city location in India and be able to deliver them the full value of a captive facility. We looked at several alternatives. At the first level, we considered a number of countries because of their history in working with Japan. They had bought a company with significant operations there, but it didn't turn out that we could scale this kind of a captive activity in Japan. We looked closely at China and for a little bit at Germany as well. And it was a close call between China and India for this particular client. But at the end of the day, it turned out that they preferred to go with India. And we looked at several cities in India, the Delhi, Gurgaon area in northern India, the city of Bangalore that Atul mentioned, Hyderabad, which is a little further north of Bangalore and is one of our favorite cities. We considered that. And finally, we actually, for this client, we chose to locate their operation in Pune because Pune had the right mix of skills and the cost pattern at that time to be able to be successful. They ended up finally with a fully captive facility that does, I'd say, at this point, about 80 to 90% of their offshore work. They still maintain some outsourced operations, both in China and India, and will probably continue to do so, and in fact may start growing it as their company's sales have grown. So not everything will go to the captive center, and this gives them a method of some flexibility as well as some pressure on the outsourced people to keep prices competitive. Let me move on to the next case study. This is a much larger company, and these guys have about 1,500 people within their internal R&D teams, mostly located in the United States. They did have some operations in Japan and Europe. No real significant R&D presence in Europe, however. Their primary driver when they first came to us was cost arbitrage. And we looked at other drivers for them, as are listed on this slide, relating to establishing a brand presence for them, that they wanted to increase their sales in Asia, and we felt that having a strong R&D presence on the ground would make a statement to that effect. They decided that the best method for them to engage in R&D resources in India and China was to really extend their US teams. Essentially, for each project, they would have a few of the people working from the US or Japan or Europe and a few people working in India. We looked at both captive and outsource for them, and we started with some initial outsourced operations. But the final recommendation for them, the roadmap that we prepared, included a significant captive operation. We do recommend for this particular client that it will be a healthy mix between the two. not the 90-10 that I mentioned in the previous case study, but much closer to an even balance between outsourcing and captive activity. They continue to grow both at a fairly rapid clip, and they are moving beyond just the extensions of US teams. They are starting to put some design projects that are led by the India team, and this was not without some trepidation, but at this point they have found that they have the maturity in order to be able to do that. I'm happy to take more questions about these case studies, but let's move on and back to Atul.
So let's talk a little bit about timelines. Setting up a captive center is a fairly large activity. It's an involved activity. It's an investment of time, effort, and money. The overall task will take between 15 and 18 months. Of course, it can vary quite a bit, but that's what we have found is quite typical. And that is after you've made a decision whether you're going to establish some kind of a presence in country. Of that, there's about 8 months that should be allocated to the decision process. This is not the decision process that you're going to plan to go abroad, but decision as to which operating model you want to do and what site you might want to select. And towards the end of this period, you will also begin some of the other activities. One of the most important activities is identifying who's going to lead the effort, what is the scope of the mission, and who the site leaders are going to be. One of the biggest hurdles that companies have to success is hiring the right person and someone who is willing to go and locate in India. It's really important that the person tasked with this activity spend some time in country. It's difficult to do this remotely. This individual has to have a broader perspective, not somebody who's very narrowly focused, but somebody who can look at the broader scope of things in country and also has sufficient visibility of the activities and goals of the sponsoring company, their company, so that they can mesh the two together. So with that, we look at establishing the first footprint. At this point, you've already got the site selected, you've got the people selected, you've decided upon a particular model that you're going to follow. Things can happen very rapidly during this period. It can take between 3 and 6 months to have that first footprint in place. So many of these tasks occur in parallel. If you've got that trusted manager in place. And one of the things that you'll find that you'll do in getting a captive operation going is get several external parties who are helping you both on the ground over there. There may be people who are helping you with real estate, other people who are helping you with legal requirements, establishing the entity's presence, or just guiding you strategically as we do. There's another added step that we recommend during this process. It doesn't really add to the timeline, but it's an activity that should be done in parallel and can actually help you avoid certain pitfalls, and that's benchmarking other companies with similar needs and goals that can improve the quality of and speed of execution. Overall, this entire activity, as I said, takes 15 to 18 months typically, but 2 years is not unreasonable. So from the time that you decide that you want to do an R&D operation offshore to the time you have a functioning facility on the ground. Let's talk a little bit about determining whether your organization is really ready. So we've done this in the form of collecting certain best practices and distilling these pointers from my experiences in helping clients and also through observations of companies that have set up their own centers in general. So broad buy-in both at the executive team level, something that I keep emphasizing, and also at the operational levels where groups and people that are potential direct customers of the center, plus various support groups and organizations like QA, procurement, finance, legal, and other departments is very critical. So this buy-in across the board is an important thing. As much of it should be done in advance, some of this should be done as each particular functionality develops. The single most important best practice is to carefully select the senior managers for the operation, get them involved in the tactical planning stages. This does not, now these are the people who will be on site, but this does not remove the strong desirability of having the highest level home country manager who's responsible solely for this task to be located in country for perhaps at least a year. Rotation of home country R&D managers, the other managers to the site, is also very beneficial. These are people at the second level of R&D or the first level of R&D who do the actual execution. By having a few people rotate for about 6 months to the site, it's good for their careers, but it also really helps the center understand the corporate culture, understand corporate practices. It really establishes the closeness of that center's operation with R&D teams back home. Now, while it may not be possible, we've found that a single consolidated entity that manages that particular center and all its functions is of much value. So not just the R&D portion of it, but all of the support functions of that center. A company that's open to doing some of these things, that makes a commitment to support the center and its the freedom of the manager to implement a plan, to execute a plan, indicates in our minds a readiness of that company to establish an R&D center in India. Let's talk a little bit about the challenges that people are faced with. So, of course, getting the support of senior management and the stakeholders is one of the biggest challenges. Generally, one is chartered with some degree of support when one decides to establish a center, but getting broader buy-in from other members of the executive staff and senior R&D managers across the company is a challenge. Carefully understanding and consolidating both of the technical needs of the project and of the business unit's strategic needs is an important follow-on step. We found that when we conducted surveys across the company on behalf of our clients, it resulted in more open conversations and more accurate rendition of needs. Sometimes the manager tasked with the center going out and doing that survey of needs runs into a roadblock because people are a little concerned whether that manager is representing the broad need. Recruiting and retaining talent in emerging countries is also a great challenge. It's one of the greatest challenges a center faces. If you don't have a brand presence, if you don't have name recognition, getting the top talent can be quite difficult. Commitment to establishing right at the outset a solid recruitment and a retention strategy, which comes about by establishing also a local company culture, is very important. This one thing helps establish the longevity of the center. It ultimately rests on the quality of the people that you recruit and retain. All right, so let's move on and talk a little bit about what steps you would follow. So as we draw to an end of our talk, there are several important takeaways. There's no substitute for commitment and good preparation. There is a tremendous and growing opportunity of doing product development in India, You'll find plenty of manpower there, skills, talent, increasingly organized into functional teams with very good management and history to draw upon. Our clients have found that the value of engaging these resources can go well beyond cost reduction, both for improving time to market and getting better product value. If it's targeted at local markets, the resulting product will probably also be better. At Amritt, we typically guide our clients based on our experience with a staged engagement process. This really works well. Thank you. I think we have time for a couple more questions.
Yes, Atul, we have a couple questions, and since we're nearing the end of our talk, I would encourage if anyone else has any questions to please send them along at this time. So one question that we got, Jim writes to us, do you know of any instances where the captive center initiatives have failed?
Yeah, good question. I think actually both Gunjan and I would like to talk about that one. Gunjan, would you like to go ahead and first talk on that?
Well, there are, in fact, reports. We don't do syndicated reports ourselves, but there are companies that have published reports on captive centers and how they have succeeded or failed. If you Google around, you can find them. I don't want to name the companies directly, but there have been a number of instances where somebody went into a captive center, perhaps prematurely or with not enough preparation, and had a significant failure. One that was reported in the press a few years ago was the instance of Apple and their efforts. I think we have written about that maybe a couple of years ago in our articles as well, and there's public information about it. But there are many other instances where this has happened. We were working with a Canadian company out of Quebec some time ago, and they had put in a small operation in Bangalore when they came to us with the news that the head of the center had suddenly quit with very little notice and taken away 2 or 3 of the key product architects with him, and that left the organization leaderless and essentially ready to collapse. This is by no means a unique story. So these kinds of things do happen, and there are many ways to mitigate this kind of situation and be able to deal with it if you plan your strategy appropriately. You won't find a lot of public information beyond this in terms of successes and failures because the companies themselves that have experienced these don't tend to publicize them. It really comes out through third parties more than anything.
One of the things that I'd like to add to it is if the expectations are not set correctly in terms of the home country R&D managers as to what a center delivers, sometimes the expectations for cost reduction are excessive. They're not realistic. So you'll find that people lose interest because of those wrong expectations. So setting those expectations, aligning to the goals is very important. The other thing that we've found in some of the centers that are having trouble is that sponsorship has been lost at the highest levels. There's been changeover in the executive team, and that transference of ownership, of sponsorship, didn't happen effectively. Yeah, I think those are some good ones. Anything else, Gunjan?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, we just have time for one more question since we are getting a little short of time, but I think this is an important one to answer. Are there any incentives from the government of India to set up a captive center?
Yeah, there are several different, as they call them, schemes in India, tax schemes, tax incentives. Some of these are tied up with the special economic zones, which are increasingly easy to set up. They are for different industries for R&D. Many of them are tied up with exporting the fruits of R&D out. Some of those are associated with manufactured goods. Gunjan, would you like to add to that one?
Yeah, I think that's a good overview. There are benefits to being able to employ people in India that may be offered by the city, state, or federal government, the union government as they call it in India. But our general advice to our clients is that those are incremental values that you certainly want to take advantage of in consultation with global accounting and tax advice, but they shouldn't be the driving factors. There's a lot of challenges to locating a captive center in India, and if you're doing it primarily because of a tax advantage, chances are that you're going to be very unhappy very soon. So right. Yes, once you decide that you're going to do it, maybe the final incremental decision between two locations might be based on tax or other incentives. And certainly you should take advantage of whatever is available to you in the right location. But if you're going to be in the automotive business and you locate, if you are in the automotive business and you locate your R&D center in a city where you can't draw talent that is experienced in the automotive business, you will lose all the benefits of of any incentives that may be offered. Right. And it'll actually cost you much more to locate there. So yes, we consider that a factor, but generally not a huge factor in making the decision.
One thing I would actually also like to add to that is many of these tax incentives are not necessarily enduring. So they may be present for a year or two or for the inception of your center, but they may disappear over time. They change. Good. So.
Right. All right. So I think we are out of time, and I would like to thank you, Atul and Gunjan, for leading the webinar today and for your insights. And I would like to thank everyone else for attending the webinar this morning. We hope it was informative. If you have any additional questions, please do email us.